Morning, friends. So every Easter service I've ever been in since I was a kid, there's always been this interchange, this greeting, this sort of exchange of words between the pastor and the congregation. And here's how it goes. The pastor says, "He is risen," and then the congregation responds, "He is risen." Well, it's not your turn yet. Wait your turn. And raise your hand in class or something. If you're a guest, they never talk when I want them to talk, but then when I don't want them, they do. So the pastor says he is risen, and then the congregation usually responds, "He is risen indeed." You'll have your turn in a minute. Okay. And I started thinking about it this week. I started thinking about that word, indeed. And it's a very appropriate word. I looked it up in the dictionary, and it means a word that confirms and amplifies a previous statement. Confirms and amplifies. So it works, it's appropriate, but it's not a real common word. It's not a word we use a lot. I mean, when was the last time you regularly used the word indeed in a sentence or in conversation? Yeah, people really don't. So in the spirit of innovation, just like trying to be relevant, I've been testing out a couple of different ideas this week on how to maybe modernize "He is risen indeed." So let me run a few past you here. I just had some real creative stuff here I think you're going to like. All right. I was thinking maybe, this is where I started. "He is risen. He sure did." No? No? Okay. All right. Well, maybe it falls a little flat. Okay. All right. So then I thought, maybe we'll kind of get it going a little bit. Take it a next step further, "He is risen. That's what I'm talking about." That's fresh, right? I talked to Pastor Josh. I said, what the kids like? He gave me a couple ideas. "He is risen. Man, you know it." But I thought about it. I shouldn't really see the 8 o'clock service doing that. I just felt like, okay. "He is risen. He is risen faux show." That's real modern, hip with the U's, All right. So then I thought, maybe we should just take the intellectual approach. Just give us the facts. Just shoot straight. Enough with the sort of pizzazz. Let's just, "He is risen. We affirm and amplify the truth of this statement." I don't know. I just sort of lacked the punch that you want at Easter. So I started thinking, after kind of trying out these different options, maybe that word indeed, even though it's not an everyday, life as we know it, normal word, maybe that's okay. Because Easter isn't a everyday, life as we know it, normal day. And the earliest Christians, friends, in the face of their troubles and hardships and difficulties and struggles, they came up with this little expression, this way of greeting one another that would inspire their hearts and remind them of what happened on Easter Sunday. And this little greeting, this little exchange has been used to encourage and motivate and refocus followers of Christ throughout the centuries. And so even if it seems a little weird, even if the lingo isn't real hip, even if you haven't used the word indeed since last Easter, we're going to join with the followers of Jesus from around the world and across the centuries, declaring the hope and power and strength that we have because of Easter Sunday in just a minute. Because before we do it, I just want to sort of remind you and tell you and explain to you everything that's packed in to this little word exchange that we're about to do. Because there was a man named Jesus, and he taught like nobody ever taught. And he lived like nobody ever lived. And he loved like no one has ever loved. And on Friday, his great courage got him arrested, and his great love led to the cross, and his great heart stopped beating. And they put a spear in his side, and they took him off the cross, and they laid him dead in a tomb. But on Sunday, Easter Sunday, that stone got rolled away. On Sunday, death lost its sting. The grave lost its victory. On Sunday, hell was defeated. Death was dethroned. Darkness derailed. The devil demotivated. On Sunday, the tomb was emptied and hope got fulfilled. On Sunday, friends, faith was vindicated, the prophets were validated, the soldiers were aggravated, the disciples were animated. On Sunday, sin lost, shame died, hope soared, love won. Sunday. Friends, Sunday, you got something beyond your life to live for, something beyond your death to live for, something beyond your death to hope for. This, friends, is therefore the central proclamation of the greatest victory over the darkest enemy by the noblest hero for the loftiest cause in all of human history. And all of that we remember and proclaim in this one little interchange, this one little greeting that we say together on Easter Sunday morning. Church, are you ready? He is risen. He is risen indeed. Faux show, you know it. That's what I'm talking about. Easter changed everything. Easter changed everything. But friends, not just in the way we sometimes think it changed everything. You see, for many of us, we think of Easter as this comforting little story that says spring is coming and flowers are blooming and life is now eternal and it's nice to wear pastel colored clothes and it's acceptable for guys and we go to church and we have egg hunts and sometimes happy, sometimes awkward family gatherings, and somehow, friends, even well-meaning Christians have turned Easter into this fairy tale day when all of life's problems go away, danger gets removed, and we get our tickets to heaven, and everybody lives happily ever after. But actually, that's exactly what Easter is not. You know, one thing you never hear, one thing that you never read in the gospel accounts, in the story of Jesus, is him rising from the dead and then showing up on the scene and saying, "Hey guys, I'm alive. Now you don't have to worry about dying anymore. One less thing to worry about, check that off the list, taken care of. Now we can just kind of go on with our days, smooth sailing, enjoy brunch." He never says that. Instead, he rises from the grave and says, "Go." Instead, he says, "Now you have an assignment." Instead, he says, in light of this event and your eternities being forever altered, your lives have an entirely new focus. You see, for the first Christians, for the followers of Jesus who first discovered that he had risen, Easter Sunday had overwhelming implications. And that's what I've titled the message this morning, The Overwhelming Implications of Easter. The resurrection for them meant that now they were going to give their lives to advance the mission of the one who rose. Now they were going to primarily be about offering the redemptive, life and hope-giving message of Jesus to the world. Easter changed everything. Easter changed not just their eternities, but everything about their lives. And that explains one of the most striking things about the story of Easter Sunday that we find in the Bible, and that's this: the reaction of Jesus' first followers to the news that he had risen. Here's how the story plays out. Sunday morning, just Sunday morning. It wasn't Easter morning yet because they didn't even know it was Easter morning. It was just Sunday morning. Sunday morning, the women, the female followers of Jesus, they're on their way to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body with spices. You see, they think this thing is over. They think it's done. They are embalming his body for decay. They had no sense that Jesus might be alive. They had no plans or ideas to pretend otherwise. They are acting and responding in a way that tells us they firmly believe their leader is dead. And actually, the scriptures tell us their biggest worry that morning, their number one concern on the way to the tomb was this: how are we going to get in? Who will roll the stone away? How are we going to get in to the tomb and get access to the body? But then they arrive on the scene, and what do they find? Here's what Mark tells us in chapter 16. But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You were looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Now, friends, understand, this is the turning point of the story. Up until now, the story's been going down, down. I mean, it's been getting worse and worse and worse. And now, all of a sudden, a glimmer of hope, and it starts to go up. The sun is rising. The hope is shining. They have just gotten the news that their beloved teacher and leader and Lord and Master is no longer dead, but he is alive. This is the greatest news they could possibly fathom, isn't it? Don't you think? But here's the part of the story that is sort of puzzling and shocking, and it's just been kind of grabbing a hold of me this year, and I want to offer it to you this morning. It's this question: how did they respond? How do they respond to this news? What is the reaction of these women to the wonderful news that Jesus has risen from the grave? Here's what Matthew says. Matthew 28, verse 8. So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy. The women hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy. Afraid, yet filled with joy. Afraid, yet filled with joy. That is like the most amazing, awesome, perplexing statement in the entire world. I mean, two emotions that have absolutely no business going together at all. Afraid, scared, terrified, and filled with joy. I mean, think of the last time you were scared, afraid, and filled with joy. I mean, they just do not fit together. These two emotions do not go. In Mark's gospel, in his version of this same story, he describes the exact same moment this way. The women get to the tomb, they get the news. Jesus is not dead. He's risen again to new life. He's alive. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. One translation says, trembling and bewilderment had seized them. Another says, trembling and bewilderment had gripped them. The implications of the fact that Jesus is alive and what this means for their lives simply overwhelms these women. That word bewildered, it's like another word we don't use too often. It's a Greek word because the New Testament is written in Greek. And it means this. It means thrown into a state of blended fear and wonderment. Fear and wonderment are just sort of swirled together, kind of mixed together in this odd combination in this moment. It's so huge. That word trembling, it's the Greek word traumos. It's where we get our English word trauma or traumatic. It means the anxiety of one who distrusts their ability to meet the requirements of a situation. The anxiety of a person who distrusts their own ability to meet the requirements of a situation. These women are in a state of blended fear and wonderment. Fear and wonderment. Fear, because they distrust their ability to meet the requirements of the situation they now face because their Lord and Savior and teacher and master is not dead. He's alive. They are just overwhelmed. They cannot imagine living up, conquering, facing, acting in the face of this new reality, friends. Ever been in that? Ever been in a place where you were like trembling and bewildered and you just faced something and you thought, I cannot do this on my own? Last Sunday after church, my family drove up north to a campsite. A bunch of families from this church and some others were camping up on the beach, and so we drove up there on Sunday, and we pitched a tent, and we stayed overnight, and then we spent all day Monday at the beach. And it was just a glorious day, out on the beach, on the sand with our kids, relaxing, enjoying one another. It was warm, it was sunny, there was no wind. It was just this great, great time of just being together. And this one family, this one guy had brought his kayak along. And he brought it down to the beach, and he was just sitting there, and he said, anyone who wants to try out the kayak, feel free. And so at one point in the afternoon, there was sort of a lull in the action. I'm like, I'm going to try out that kayak. I'm going to take that. So I grabbed the other guy, and I kind of grabbed this kayak. We walked down to the water, and I get in the kayak, and I'm kind of pushed up in this kayak. And then John Swan, who goes to this church and who used to be my friend, he grabs the front of the kayak, the handle on the front, and he started leading me out into the surf, right, as the waves, kind of getting me out to the, he walks out to where the water's like up to his chest, and he's just holding me stable in this kayak, because I'm up on this, like, sit on top kayak. I'm kind of precarious, and I'm this huge, awkward person in this teeny little kayak, which is pretty funny to think about. And so I'm there, and the waves are kind of rolling in. He's just holding me and kind of shielding me, and I'm just sitting there waiting for a break in the action, waiting for the waves. And the waves were really big that day, like 6-footers, 7-footers, like big stuff. Is this funny? Anyway, so I'm just sitting there waiting for like a break in the action, kind of feeling a little vulnerable in my little teeny kayak, and I'm looking out, and there's no break in the action, and the water is cold. I mean, it's like frigid right now, and John is up to like here in the water, and he's getting impatient being out there, and so he's like, dude, just go. And I'm like, no, John, I can't, not yet. I mean, there's no break. I'm not going to make it. He's like, dude. So finally we go and banter back and forth, and John's holding the thing, and the waves, and finally he just gets impatient. This wave comes, and it kind of goes past, and then he's like, all right, you're going, go, and he just shoves me, and I'm going. So I'm like, and I'm paddling, and I'm going, and I'm paddling, and I'm trying to get out there past where the waves are breaking, so I just don't get killed, right? And so I'm paddling, and I see off in the distance, like 20 feet, 30 feet away, like this giant mound of water starting to form, and I'm paddling, I'm trying to get to it before it gets to me. So I'm paddling, and I'm going, and at about 10 feet, like 10 feet to impact, this mound of water turns into a wave, and it's like to the point where it's just about to pitch. And according to my calculations, like the fast calculations that are happening rapidly in my mind as I paddle, I am thinking like this wave is going to break and crash exactly at the moment when I get to it, and it's big, and there's no way I'm making this. Like, this isn't happening, friends. I mean, I'm going down. I'm going to die. And so I'm looking at this wave, and I got the paddle, and I'm going, and I'm looking at and I think, okay, this is a moment of truth. But because I am the man that I am, this is mostly for my wife when she's here later, because I am filled with such bravery and courage and gallant toughness, I looked at that wave in my kayak and took that paddle and chucked it to the right and completely abandoned ship on the left. It was either going to be the kayak or me, and I wanted to live to preach Easter Sunday. So I just abandoned ship, go under the wave, the kayak gets like pummeled back to the beach. John's back there going, are you kidding me? Are you serious right now? It was just like this awesomely uncourageous move that I made. So I was feeling trembled and bewildered in that moment. Like, I cannot make this on my own. Eventually, I made it out there. And here's the entire message this morning. If you really understand Easter, friends, if you even just begin to grasp the implications of what this event means for your life, for the world, for all of creation, for all of eternity, then I believe, like the women at the tomb that day, you will be gripped and seized with trembling and bewilderment. Fear and wonder and awe and the sense of being overwhelmed with God's love will just swirl around you and over you, because this thing is way too big. Because Easter is not just something that happened. Easter is something that changes what will happen. Easter is not just an event in history. Easter is a new reality so great that its implications are overwhelming for those who believe. Do you believe? Do you believe that God loved this world so much that he sent his one and only Son to defeat death, that we, through faith in him, might have new life now and forever? Are you overwhelmed today by the love of God expressed on Easter? Because one thing that's crazy about the Gospel of Mark's Gospel, is that if you look in your Bibles, you don't have to do it now, but just check this out later. If you look in your Bibles, right after verse 8, that verse I read earlier in the Gospel of Mark, there's a line. The publishers put a line there, and then there's a little note under that line. And the note reads this way: the earliest manuscripts don't have Mark 16, 9 through 20. In other words, the earliest manuscripts don't have the last 11 verses of this story. What? That's kind of weird, right? Here's how it works. Like the Bible scholars are so committed to the integrity and authenticity of the Bible that they've looked back at all the copies, because we have so many copies of the Bible, more copies than any other ancient manuscript. And so we're able to sort of really tell very accurately what was written and what wasn't. And they've discovered that the earliest copies we have don't have this little ending at the end. It ends at verse 8. Well, it's a really weird place to end the story, which is why later on, as sort of scribes copied down and sort of made copies of this, they probably were like, he can't end the story here. He forgot the happily ever after part. We'll just add it in for him, right? So they add this little ending on the end, and now we discover, like, he didn't actually write it that way. It ends at verse 8. It's a crazy, crazy way to end the story. I mean, think about it this way. Mark tells the entire story of Jesus' life. He tells about his miraculous birth and then his tremendous teaching and his love and power and healings, all the healings and all the miracles he performs. He talks about all of that. And then he talks about his arrest and his torture and his death. And then he talks about his resurrection from the dead, how he overcame the power of the grave. And all of that, that entire story, he concludes with these words. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. What? You can't end the story that way. You cannot end the greatest story ever told with 3 women trembling and bewildered, fleeing the scene. But he does. Mark does. Why? I believe Mark wants us to know that the story of Easter is not just a happily ever after, have a nice brunch story. It's not just a story that wraps up all neat and tidy and requires nothing from us. Mark's Easter story is about calling people to follow and trust and depend and rely and have faith in Jesus, even if it means life will get scary. Mark says God is looking for people who will trust him even when it's not easy to trust him, even when the waves of life get real big and it's extremely scary. Because the message of Easter, friends, is this: everything's changed if you believe. Your eternity is changed. Now go. Give your life to advance the mission of the one who rose. Now go and offer the redemptive, life and hope-giving message of Jesus to the world. Friends, if you believe, if Easter is real, if the tomb is empty, if Jesus is alive, if God has come to earth and defeated the power of sin and death, then we should be overwhelmed with the fact that we've been called to be and do something that on our own we simply cannot do. And so to face what we've been called to face, and to live the way we've been called to live, and to be and become who we've been called to be and become, we must rely on him. We must depend on him. We must gain strength, not from within ourselves, but from the one who rose from the grave. And just part of how we do that is like the early Christians. We gather together on Easter Sunday. And we remind each other of the power and victory and life and grace and authority and security and hope that we have, not because of us, but because of him, because of the resurrection. Because even when life is overwhelming and we can't make it on our own, we remember the event. We remember the event. We remember the event when sin lost and shame died, and hope soared, and love won. Easter, friends, is the greatest victory over the darkest enemy by the noblest hero for the loftiest cause in all of human history. Death is defeated. The tomb is empty. Say it with me again, church. You have new life because of Christ. He is risen. He is risen indeed. He is risen. He is risen. Say it like you mean it. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Yes, he has. And now go, afraid yet filled with joy, and advance the mission of the one who rose. Amen.